We moved into a whole new era of the BYU-Utah rivalry with Kyle Whittingham stepping down and Morgan Scalley taking over as Utah's head coach. What does it mean for the BYU Cougars? I'll just say this: the fun is just beginning.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. I'm Jake Hatch, executive producer of the KSL Sports Zone in Salt Lake City, Utah, and a 14-year credentialed media member at BYU. I am your resident expert and insider as your host here on this show. And as always, thank you for making Locked On America's #1 sports podcast network. Coming up on today's show, we're examining the new era of the rivalry between BYU and Utah with a new head coach at the helm of the Utah football program. What is Morgan Scalley taking over in Salt Lake City mean for Kalani Sitake and somebody like Jay Hill? We'll delve into that. Then we'll talk about BYU basketball, a big win on Saturday night, demolishing UC Riverside, and they actually showed some things I talked about wanting to see from this team. We'll delve into that a little bit deeper, and then we'll also talk about a new change with the Big 12, potential private capital on the horizon for BYU to take advantage of. Is it the right option for the BYU Cougars? We'll get into that. It's all ahead on today's show, and it's all brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. If you want to be right in the middle of the action all season long, visit FanDuel.com and place your live NFL bets all season long. All right, so if you missed it over the weekend, I don't know how you couldn't. Kyle Whittingham announced he is stepping down from his position as Utah football coach. Now, that will not happen until after the Las Vegas Bowl, which Utah will play against Nebraska on New Year's Eve. But then they shortly thereafter, speaking of the Utes, announced the ascension or the appointment of Morgan Scalley, who was the head coach in waiting, to be officially the new head coach at Utah. This is going to be an interesting dynamic to see how this all plays out, because this is uncharted territory for Utah in well over 2 decades. They have not had a head coaching transition since 2005 when Kyle Whittingham took the reins of that program. And by all accounts, and this is from a BYU prism, he has been nothing short of remarkable up there at Utah. You could say that Kyle Whittingham has had a Lavelle Edwards-like impact on the University of Utah, but as often is the case, the guy who replaces the guy puts a lot of pressure on that individual. And that's what Morgan Scalley now has to step into as the head coach in waiting at Utah. He will have to do battle with BYU, who has got the upper hand of the last little while when it comes to the rivalry. BYU's won 3 straight games and obviously feeling like they are going to be on a run here for the foreseeable future. We'll see what happens with regards to that, because they'll play again next season. I'm sure Utah will do everything within their power, as they often do when these two get together, to win that game and turn the tide back in favor of Utah. The biggest question mark I've got now is, now that Morgan Scalley is at the helm of the Utah football program, how is he going to go about changing his staff? Because whenever a new head coach takes over, he obviously has the, potential or the opportunity to remake the staff into how he would like it to be. That obviously has lent itself to the question, are the days of Jay Hill and Provo, Utah numbered? Now, anybody that says they have the answer to that, they're dead wrong, because I don't have that answer. I don't think anybody has that answer outside of Jay Hill himself. I would fully expect that there will be at least a phone call made by Morgan Scalley to Jay Hill and say, hey, Jay, I'm taking over in Salt Lake City. What is your interest level in coming back to Utah, which is Jay Hill's alma mater, and being my defensive coordinator? If that phone call does not come, I don't think Morgan Scalley is doing his job in the right capacity. I also would expect that maybe some other players, if not coaches from BYU, could be enticed, they can make a move north, because in this day and age, the transfer portal giveth and it taketh, and obviously is the same way with coaches. We are going to see a change at the helm in Utah that is going to have an impact more than just one head coach stepping down, his defensive coordinator and head coach in waiting stepping into that role. And to expect anything less than that, or expect anything more than that, would be foolhardy to think that that's the only change or changes that are going to happen. We are going to see a whole new look when it comes to the University of Utah. Morgan Scalley, I'm sure, has had ideas of what he would like to see Utah look like in his own image that he will be implementing both immediately when he takes over finally as the head coach of the Utes, but more importantly, over time. And that means this offseason could signal a whole new era in this rivalry. Will it be more civil? Who knows? Will it be more of a collegial type feel? Because now you'll have two true alumni of these universities. Speaking of Kalani Sitake, who went to BYU, Morgan Scalley, who was a Utah graduate, you'll have two alumni of these respective universities leading their programs. I am very curious to see how it all goes, but I fully expect a guy like Jay Hill to get phone calls and overtures from Utah to move back north. Do I think it'll be successful? Well, I sure hope not, because I hope that Jay Hill is in Provo so long as he wants to be. And I also think that Jay Hill, and this is my personal opinion on the matter, has every intention of being a head coach in the not too distant future. What does that mean? A season, 2 seasons? Is it even this offseason? TBD. But I do think that Jay Hill has every intention of being back in the driver's seat of a college football program at some point. And whether he sees that going the way of sticking around in Provo and continuing to build what he's built with BYU's defense under the direction of Kalani Sitake, or does he see a call home, as it were, to go back to Utah and work with Morgan Scalley and the Utes as his ticket to wherever he wants to go? We'll see, but I'm very curious to see what other ramifications come from this. Could there be assistant coaches at BYU that a guy like Morgan Scalley wants to bring in? Are there coaches at Utah that Kalani Sitake in turn says, hey, I want you to come to Provo? This is going to be an interesting offseason. Get ready for it, because expect some fireworks, expect some change, expect something, I guess is probably the best way to say, to happen, because you don't just make a change at the top with a college football program, no matter how long Morgan Scalley has been waiting and chomping at the bit to take over this job, without expecting him to bring some change to that football program, which will obviously have impacts on BYU and potentially the Big 12 and even college football as a whole. The ripple effects of coaching changes, they don't just exist in a, what I'm trying to say, they don't exist in a vacuum. You can't just make one change and expect that's it. Very rarely does that play out, and especially when it comes to college football. I am very curious to see what Morgan Scalley does with the Utah football program, and like I said, the impact it has on BYU. But I also add this. It's also an opportunity for Kalani Sitake and the BYU football program, to scoop up some guys of their own. So expect maybe some talk of guys going north, but also expect some talk of guys maybe going south at the same time, because as often is the case with this rivalry, they're obviously entwined, and they always will remain that way for the foreseeable future. All right, coming up next, we're going to talk BYU basketball. I thought it was a really, really solid win, obviously highlighted by some highlight reel dunks and the like on Saturday night against UC Riverside. But there were 2 names in particular that I was more impressed to see on the stat sheet and the way that they played in this game than even guys like AJ DeBonsa, Richie Saunders, and Rob Wright. Allow me to explain, and we'll get to that next right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Our Frames. The holidays are officially here, which means gift hunting season is on. If you want something meaningful, personal, and guaranteed to get a reaction, Aura Flames is the gift that delivers every single time. It's not just something you wrap, it's a way to share your memories along the way, because it's not just your average picture frame. You can preload the frame with photos before gifting it, so when they plug it in, the memories are already there. No apps to figure out, no setup headaches, just instant smiles. The best part is there's endless uploads of pictures and 30-second videos through their app, and the best part is you also can add a personalized message right inside the frame, so the gift feels thoughtful the moment it is open. Packaging comes gift ready, no price tag, no wrapping needed. It's all a huge win. It's a holiday gift that actually gets used and not forgotten in a drawer. So for limited time, save on the perfect gift visiting auraframes.com to get $35 off Aura's best-selling Carver mat frames, named #1 by Wirecutter, by using the promo code COLLEGE at checkout. That's auraframes.com, promo code COLLEGE. This deal is exclusive to listeners, and frames sell out fast, so order yours now to get it in time for the holidays. Show support for the show by mentioning Locked On Cougars at checkout as well. But once again, that's auraframes.com using the promo code COLLEGE. Terms and conditions apply. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. And thank you for making Locked On the number one sports podcast network in America. If you're a true diehard Cougar fan, the Everyday All Access tier is for you, my friends. It's a brand new addition to this podcast. If you get one-on-one text access with myself, all access episodes, an exclusive newsletter, and a 15% discount on the Locked On merch store, head to lockedoncougars.supercast.com to join the Everyday Air Club and unlock that all access tier. You can find the link in the show notes below as well if you want to join our brand new Everyday All Access tier. Check that out. Once again, lockedoncougars.supercast.com. All right. So BYU basketball got a big win, 100-53 over UC Riverside on Saturday night. Every game until Big 12 play starts for BYU is they're supposed to do this exact thing that they did to UC Riverside. They're supposed to blow them out. But more importantly, what I talked about last week, if you're an everydayer on this podcast, is I wanted to see BYU finally get a look at who ultimately may fill out their bench roles, because BYU has to find a way to, have guys beyond Richie Saunders, AJ DeBonsa, and Rob Wright really help out BYU in the circumstance. And there were two names I felt like on Saturday night that showed, okay, those guys are very likely part of BYU's core rotation going into Big 12 play, because they're starting to show that they know and obviously can thrive in the minutes afforded to them. Those two names, Dominic Diomande, who had 4 points in this game. He was 1 of 2 from the field, but more important than that, Dominique shows an ability to be a defensive stopper with that second unit. And then the other one was Alexi Kostic. Now, remember, Alexi came over. He's from Austria, played some professional basketball over in Europe before coming over to BYU, but in 22 minutes had 15 points, 5 of 8 from the field, all 5 of those field goals coming from 3, also added 4 assists. I think Alexi is starting to show that he is going to be this season's find that was a late addition to the roster. Remember last year, a guy like Mihailo Boskovic, he was a late addition to BYU's roster, and throughout the first part of the season, you felt like, okay, is this guy ever really going to morph into anything that they need him to be? Well, down the stretch last season, Boskovic, who played 10 minutes in this game of his own, 5 points off the bench, became a critical cog in that second unit for BYU and played a big role for BYU. I think that's what we're seeing from Alexi Kostic, and that's why you're seeing a guy like Tyler Miras, who came to BYU with the thought that he was going to kind of be the guy that Alexi Kostic proved to be against UC Riverside, maybe losing out on some minutes. Miras only played 6 minutes, was 0-2 from the field, had 1 rebound. Tyler was supposed to be a sharpshooting guy that came in and was really going to help BYU's three-point percentage, but he's not been that guy so far this season. You hope at some point maybe he becomes that, but right now you're seeing guys like Alexi Kostic as well as Dominic Diomande taking advantage of their opportunities and making, I think, a decision for Kevin Young that much easier than it may have been previous to this. Now, you got to prove that over time as well, because Kostic can't just have an appearance like this, 22 minutes, 15 points, and then come out this coming week, tomorrow night, in fact, and maybe play 20 minutes and score 4 points. He needs to be a consistent option off the bench, because it feels like once you get into Big 12 play, your frontline guys, great. BYU's got some of the best frontline guys in the entire Big 12 conference. The question will be when they are taking their breaks on the bench, obviously, because they can't play a full 40 minutes every single night. But when they are taking those opportunities to run that second unit out there, can you at least be even and not be giving up leads or finding yourself in a hole as a result of your second unit? I already think that Hadim Boop is already proven to be the number 6 or number 7 man on BYU's roster this season. But while I don't think this roster is going to go 12 men deep, I do think that they have at least maybe 8 or 9 guys who are going to be capable contributors. And those, I think, if you want to look at it from Saturday night's prism, those 9 guys are AJ DeBonsa, Keba Keita, Kennard Davis Jr., Richie Saunders, Robert Wright III. That's your starting 5. And then beyond that, Dominic Diomande, Hadim Boop, Mihailo Boskovic, and Alexi Kostic. Those are your 9 guys right now. Now, the interesting part will be once you get Abdullah Ahmed obviously mixed in here, because he'll be eligible to play, I believe, this weekend once grades post, the first semester is over. Does he make it maybe a 10-man rotation, or does he take minutes away from one of those guys that's in that second unit and essentially force his way onto the court as that backup 5-man for BYU? That's the question that remains to be answered. But it really feels like at most, maybe this team for BYU has got a 10-man rotation. I'll just say this right now. Some of you are probably going to ask inevitably about Brody Kozlowski. Everything I understand about Brody Kozlowski is he's going to redshirt this season. You will not see him on the court the rest of this year. And it's unfortunate because obviously Brody could have been a guy based on his pedigree and everything he brought from the high school ranks to be that dead-eye three-point shooter off the bench. But it looks like he is going to be redshirting this season, and obviously you'll miss out on him. You already have guys like Nate Pickens and Dawson Baker who are already sidelined due to season-ending knee injuries, and that's disappointing because I thought both of those guys had capability here. But Kevin Young, his charge, he's got to make do with what he's got. And I think that these 9 guys, accepting the fact we haven't seen Abdullah Ahmed yet, once we get an opportunity to see that, maybe it expands to 10 men, maybe it stays at 9, maybe even shrinks to maybe as little as 8 guys once Big 12 play gets here. But Kevin Young has got to find that core rotation of guys that are going to lead BYU through Big 12 play. And the games like they've got upcoming for BYU, they're playing some overmatched teams. And that is the opportunity to get a real good look at these guys. They play Pacific tomorrow night. They'll also play Abilene Christian on Friday night, and then right before Christmas, they play Eastern Washington. And then after that, it's on. You're at Kansas State, you're home to Arizona State, and you're off and rolling in Big 12 play. You have to take advantage of these next 3 games, get a real good look at what that rotation looks like, and then set it and be ready to rock and roll when Big 12 play comes. That does not mean that Big 12 play is going to cause BYU to be unable to change that rotation if need be. Because remember last year, it was that game at West Virginia. BYU threw Trey Roberts out on the court, and also threw Mihailo Boskovic out there. And those two proved to be very capable weapons that BYU used the rest of the season. Could that happen in Big 12 play once again? TBD, but you have to identify the core guys that you feel like are going to be your best options off the bench and roll with them. It's nothing against Tyler Maris. It's nothing against Xavier State and on down the list of the other guys who would obviously like to see more minutes, but they have not proven to be worthy of seeing more time on the court. So you got to focus in on the guys that you have that are showing out in the minutes afforded to them. I think like a guy like Alexei Kostic, he took advantage of that opportunity last Saturday night. As I mentioned, you do need to see him back that up. You need to see guys like Dominic Diomande and Hadim Boop, etc. They've got to back up their play and be consistent in their roles. But so long as they do that, I think we're seeing a tightening of that rotation. And it sure looks like maybe it's a 9, potentially a 10-man rotation. But I would fully expect that Kevin Young, he'll continue to let that kind of work its way out as Big 12 play draws closer and closer. But the way the Big 12 is stacking up right now, I know BYU is a relatively soft start because at Kansas State and Arizona State is not necessarily the murderers row. You obviously have Utah right after that. That's not the worst start to Big 12 play. But once you get through the first 4 games, at Kansas State, home to ASU, at Utah, home to TCU. Oh, and then after that, you're at Texas Tech, home to Utah, Arizona, Kansas. It starts to become a murderer's row. So take advantage of the opportunity while the time is here to find the best options you can and hope that they are the options that you need. Because if BYU is wholly reliant on their big 3 every single game in Big 12 play, it seems like a recipe for a team that's not going to achieve what we hope it's going to achieve. But maybe I'm wrong about that. And we'll see how it all shakes out. But I did like what I saw Saturday night, and we'll see if they can follow that up tomorrow night against the Pacific Tigers, an old West Coast Conference foe coming to town. That'll be a 7 o'clock tip on ESPN+. All right, coming up next, we will finish up today's show talking about a change with the Big 12 that could benefit BYU, but is BYU interested in taking advantage of said benefit? We'll talk more about that next, right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. NFL Sundays move fast, one big play, and suddenly everything feels different in those games. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it literally in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets as action unfolds every drive, every momentum swing, and every highlight moment throughout any one of those games. Live betting is best when the game starts to shift. A receiver gets hot, a defense tightens up, or the momentum flips after a big turnover. And the best part is FanDuel lets you jump in on that moment. Live spreads and money lines adjust instantly. Player props update as guys heat up or cool down, and you can bet the next touchdown score, drive results, totals, and more. It keeps you locked in literally to every snap, every drive, and every possibility because, you're all right there in the action. So if you want to be right in the middle of the action all season long, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season. That's FanDuel. As they like to say, the game moves fast, and so can you. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Thank you for bearing with me last week. It's not a week that I want to repeat anytime soon. It's just a crazy week, a crazy confluence of different events. Those of you who know, it's just a crazy week. So thank you for bearing with kind of the haphazard publishing schedule of the podcast, but it's in the rearview mirror. So we should be smooth sailing as we get back into a regular flow of things here on the podcast. And as always, thank you for making it a part of your day. And thank you for making Locked On America's #1 sports podcast network. All right. So if you missed it over the weekend, obviously Utah announced they're going to take a private equity deal with Otro Partners that could pay them up to $500 million in capital. Now, the clarification there is it's not $500 million right out of the gate. It's not like Otro Capital is plopping down $500 million and saying, here you go, Utah. Over time, it could yield that amount of money. It's not an immediate infusion of that much money, to be very clear on that. But shortly after that news, that bombshell, because it is a bombshell, it's the first of its kind, speaking of Utah, with their capital, the private equity deal, the Big 12 has announced that they are looking at their own $500 million private capital deal with two partners. Now, these are partners in the case of this that are Redbird Capital Partners and Weatherford Capital. And the two sides are still in discussions, but they're closing on an agreement that would allow any one of the 16 members of the Big 12 Conference to take advantage of $500 million in private capital that they could use for whatever they need to do. Think of it this way. It would have it would be essentially a loan to any one of these schools that would be paid out after the fact in terms of paying up with regards to making sure that you're all square with this capital partner. But this is different in that Utah is spinning off a new LLC that is going to have a majority stake owned by Utah and a minority stake owned by the Otro Partners. In this case, the Big 12 Conference is not giving any equity or partnership or any share of ownership to both the Redbird Capital Partners or Weatherford Capital in this deal. Essentially, it's $500 million, and it creates a strategic partnership with these two capital funds, these private equity funds, and allowing the Big 12 schools to take advantage of potentially $30 million in money. It's a loan. That's the lack of a better term. It's a loan for these schools. Now, you're probably thinking, well, Jake, BYU doesn't do debt. They don't. History says the BYU, everything that they have operated with when it comes to their athletic department is that they have to eat what they kill. They've always had to operate in the black. They're one of a small handful of athletic departments literally across college football. Even the Titans in college football, the Ohio States of the world, still run in the red. They still run a deficit every single year. Utah runs a deficit every single year. I think somebody said not that long ago, just 15 athletic departments actually run in the black. Speaking of, they operate with a net positive revenue every single year, and BYU is one of those. So looking at it on its head, I'd be hard-pressed to think that BYU is going to jump wholesale in to this private capital deal and take on the extra $30 million being afforded to it by the Big 12 Conference, but I also can't say that BYU wouldn't do it. History says the BYU will be very wary of a deal like this, but I think at the same time, BYU and everybody else in college sports are looking at their rival in the University of Utah at that private equity deal and wondering how that's going to play out. Could there come a day that BYU needs that amount of money or that amount of capital to continue to keep up with the Joneses? Yeah, in theory, that could happen. But I also think that BYU, the way they've operated for literally decades, if not 100 years now, is that their athletic department understands what it is, but they're also not going to go outside themselves. Is BYU ever going to have the nicest, shiniest facilities in all of college football? No. And if they did, I'd be seriously wondering what went wrong and who decided to do that in Provo, Utah, because that's just not been BYU style. Just look at history for the BYU athletic department. They've always had, I think, what you call functional facilities who get the job done, but what they lack in flash, they make up for with on-field results. And I think that's something that Kalani Sitake has bought into. He understands that his football program, while they may not have the all the bells and whistles when it comes to their facilities, he knows that, as he mentions, he doesn't want a guy who is coming to a school, or in this case, BYU, just for a paycheck. He said, if you're attracted by the facilities, that's a guy that I want to play. That was a direct quote he used when his new deal was announced by BYU, his new contract, because he understands that if you're in it for the glitz and the glam and all the shiny bells and whistles that come with facilities or the paycheck you're getting from NIL or revenue sharing, that type of stuff, that means you're in it for the wrong reasons. And that, I think, screams to exactly why I think, from at least my vantage point, I'd be hard-pressed to think that BYU is going to jump in and sign a deal with this. Now, would they, speaking of BYU, be interested in working with Redbird Capital or Weatherford Capital? Because those two entities, they obviously command billions with a B, billions of dollars in all kinds of different strategic partnerships. And could you leverage that to help BYU generate more money? Yeah, I think you could work that. You don't have to take the money, because this is a deal, the way it's being structured by the Big 12, that they're not all required, speaking of the 16-member schools, to take on this money. Will there be some that take advantage of it? Yes, because they need the money. There are a lot of athletic departments in the Big 12 Conference that are already stretched paper thin when it comes to their margins. And oh, by the way, they have to pay $20.5 million in revenue share upcoming. They obviously want to invest in brand new projects when it comes to stadiums, facilities, all the different things that go into college athletics in this day and age. Are they going to have to use maybe some of this money? Yes, but it comes with strings, because obviously it is a loan that has to be paid back over time. So that's the thing about this. I think that BYU be very interested in maybe talking with Redbird Capital or Weatherford Capital and saying, hey, how can you help us leverage more on when it comes to our opportunities to generate more revenue? I think BYU's done a very, very good job with their overall revenue generating activities. I'm speaking of sponsorships, making sure that seemingly anything and everything that can be sponsored in a BYU athletics sense is done so. But can they look at it from with a new fresh set of eyes if they were to work with these capital firms, these investment firms, and get a feel for, okay, here's where you can leverage this a little bit more, or maybe you can look at this in terms of investing a little deeper there. That's, I think, where the strategic partnership comes in. But if it doesn't come with the strings, you have to take the money to keep that a partnership alive. I think BYU would be interested, but I also don't think BYU is going to be like, hey, yeah, give us the $30 million, because that's just not the way that BYU is rolled for literally ever. So very interested to see how it all goes. But the era of private capital, private equity, which are, by the way, two very separate things. Private equity obviously requires a stake from these venture firms in the future outcomes. They obviously get a stake when it comes to that money. And obviously, in the case of Utah, a whole new company that's being spun off. But private capital, it just comes back with, essentially, it's a private loan being offered. That's the difference in those two entities. But all the same, looking at it, at least from my vantage point and the way I understand BYU operates, I'd be hard-pressed to think that BYU is going to jump right into working private equity and private capital deals right away. But could there become a time? Yeah, absolutely. I think it could, but it will be on BYU's terms. It will not be on anybody else's terms, because just the way I know the BYU operates, they won't be pushed into a corner that they don't want to be pushed into, at least from my vantage point as a podcaster who's covered BYU for a decade and a half. I just don't, and more than that, going to school there, all the different relationships I've got, it just does not seem like BYU's cup of tea to jump right in and say, yeah, give us that money and we'll pay it back on the back end. That's just not the way BYU rolls. All right, that's going to do it for today's edition of the show. As always, thank you for your continued support of the podcast. You guys are absolutely awesome. Do want to remind you guys about our brand new Everydayer Club. If we made your Spotify Wrapped, by the way, a lot of you probably pay attention to that out there. Also, YouTube recaps. Prove it on social media to secure a free month of our brand new Everydayer Club. Just tag our national Locked On Podcast Network account on any social platform, and we'll drop you a code for a free month. Be one of the first to join the Everydayer Club to get your free show content ad-free and exclusive access to our members-only Discord channel. And for those of you on video, we're going to send you right now to the 24/7 national Locked On College Football channel. And if you're on audio, make sure your second listen is our friends over at Locked On College Football or Locked On Big 12. So as always, thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen today. Until tomorrow, everybody, come back and be an everydayer right here on the Locked On Podcast Network.